Hey everyone, welcome to this comprehensive explainer. Look, if you're currently fueled entirely by coffee and maybe feeling just a little panicked about your upcoming soteriology exam, take a deep breath. You are in the exact right place. Today, we're going to completely master John Wesley's Sermon 85 on working out our own salvation. This specific sermon, it's literally the definitive blueprint for Wesley's fourfold Ordo Salutis, or his order of salvation. We're going to break down this incredibly complex theology into clear, memorable pieces, so by the time we're done here, you'll be more than ready to just crush that exam. Grab your notebooks, because this is your ultimate study guide. Here's the agenda for today. We'll start with the exam blueprint, then walk straight through the 4 stages: preventing grace, convincing grace, justifying grace, and sanctifying grace. Finally, we'll cap it off with an exam summary table. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the exam blueprint's engine and chassis. Okay, let's dive right into this. To really get Sermon 85, you have to understand that Wesley didn't just invent his theology out of thin air. It's actually this brilliant mechanical synthesis of 2 very different traditions. Think of his theology like a high-performance vehicle. On one side, you've got the Arminian engine. Jacobus Arminius gives us the theological logic of universal atonement, free grace, and resistible grace. This engine completely breaks away from strict, deterministic predestination. It provides the pure horsepower of free grace that genuinely offers salvation to all people. But an engine needs a frame to sit in, right? That's where the Puritan chassis comes in. And this was heavily influenced by Wesley's mother, Susanna Wesley. She instilled this absolute demand for methodical discipline, rigorous self-examination, and highly practical holiness. So, Arminianism gives us the engine to freely choose God, and Puritanism gives us the structural chassis to actually work out that grace in our messy, everyday lives. Now, as we trace how this all works, you'll see these 2 historical influences sort of alternate and blend together across 4 chronological steps. Step 1, preventing grace. Step 2, convincing grace. Step 3, justifying grace. And Step 4, sanctifying grace. This sequence right here, this is exactly how the Ordo Salutis unfolds. Moving right along to Section 2, Stage 1, preventing grace. You'll definitely want to know this first key term, anti-katai, which essentially translates to the natural man. In our fallen state, the reality is we are completely corrupted, but here's where that Arminian engine kicks into gear. God steps in with preventing grace. This is a universal light that God unilaterally breathes into every single human heart. He inherently enlightens everyone born into the world. And this is a massive deal because it actually restores our baseline moral conscience. God provides what Wesley calls the very first motion of good. By handing out this grace universally, God completely levels the theological playing field. Because of preventing grace, our free will is restored just enough so that humanity has a genuinely free moral choice to either listen to God's truth or push it away. So basically, no one is without excuse. But of course, there's a catch. Preventing grace gives us a moral conscience, sure. It gives us the diagnosis of our sin, but it doesn't actually give us the cure. Left to itself, the natural mind is still totally blind to the saving work of Christ. So for anything to actually happen, that universal light has to intersect with specific gospel revelation. We literally need the written word and the preached gospel to give us the actual object of our saving faith. We need the Arminian light to wake us up and the gospel revelation to save us. Both of these components have to fire in exact sequence. Which brings us to Section 3, Stage 2, convincing grace. Okay, highlight this Greek term in your notes. Elencho. It means an investigative strike or a profound reproof. In convincing grace, the theological influence violently shifts over to that Puritan heritage. The Holy Spirit actively targets the internal religion of our mind and heart. This is what you'd call the Puritan morphology of conversion. Modeled right out of Susanna Wesley's Epworth Rectory, this tradition demanded deep, introspective mourning. You needed a truly wounded conscience before any comfort of salvation was even put on the table. The Spirit uses this elencho to just ruthlessly expose our spiritual poverty and completely break human pride. It is intense, introspective, internal law work. Wesley argues here that God actively infuses a desire for holiness, but he does it by breaking the rebellion of our will. Convincing grace isn't just some polite intellectual acknowledgement of, oh yeah, I guess I'm a sinner. No way. The believer has to agonizingly yield to this conviction. You have to realize, with absolute fear and trembling, that you have literally nothing you haven't received from above. Stripping away all of that self-righteousness, that creates an essential vacuum in your soul, and that empty vacuum is exactly what faith needs to fill. Next up is Section 4, Stage 3, Justifying Grace. Once that internal vacuum is created, we hit the real turning point of the new birth, and the Arminian logic grabs the steering wheel again. So the crucial point here is this brilliant both-and dynamic. Sermon 85 is built entirely on this synergistic nexus, this perfect meeting point between divine initiative and human responsibility. God completely supplies the forensic pardon, the actual forgiveness of sins. He takes absolute initiative. However, the individual must actively exercise faith. God works, and therefore, you must work. Let's look at the actual mechanics of how this plays out with two more exam terms. The Holy Spirit uses pytho, which is this persuasive drawing toward the cross. But remember our Arminian engine? Grace is resistible. The Holy Spirit's persuasion is incredibly powerful, but it's never coercive. You always retain the terrifying capacity to say no and resist. This completely avoids fatalism and guarantees that your faith is freely given. When you do actively choose to yield to that persuasion, you experience sunus Romae, crucifixion, or a forensic identification with Christ. Your old nature is condemned and the penalty of sin is totally canceled. God's grace alone saves you, absolutely, but it inevitably demands your cooperative, faithful reception. Almost there. Section 5, Stage 4, Sanctifying Grace. Now that we've been internally justified, Susanna Wesley's Puritan influence roars back into the picture to define what a justified life actually looks like on the outside. Enter metamorphosis. This is the active, ongoing metamorphosis of the believer. God has worked internally to will, and now he equips you externally to do. The actual temperaments and dispositions of your heart are continually refined. All that internal conviction and justification, it has to inevitably translate into outward, tangible action. The believer is pushed toward the ultimate logical endpoint of Wesley's whole theology, Christian perfection, or reaching a state of many, meaning perfect love. The Arminian grace is powerful enough to conquer sin, and the Puritan discipline is relentless enough to pursue that victory every single day. So what does this actually look like in practice? Wesley set up very specific everyday Puritan disciplines to keep that spiritual chassis from falling apart. You've got class meetings, which honestly today might just look like your weekly small group or a really dedicated accountability text thread. You have the disciplined, daily searching of the scriptures, a total abhorrence of idle time, and active engagement in works of mercy. That means getting out there, volunteering at a food bank, advocating for the marginalized. This is what we call social holiness. The inward combustion of grace has to produce the outward momentum of a disciplined life. And honestly, you can practice these exact same structural habits today to make sure your internal faith is being externally validated. All right, we made it to Section 6, the exam summary table. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire integrated system in one ultimate cheat sheet. You might want to literally take a screenshot of this in your mind. Notice how perfectly it maps out. Stage 1, preventing grace, is the universal light, driven by the Arminian engine to restore free will. Stage 2, convincing grace, is the investigative strike, heavily driven by that Puritan morphology of conversion. Stage 3, justifying grace, brings us the forensic pardon, relying entirely on Arminian resistibility and our free response. And lastly, Stage 4, sanctifying grace, gives us the active metamorphosis, governed by the Puritan chassis of holy living and discipline. The engine and the chassis alternate and synthesize flawlessly across the whole fourfold sequence. As you hit the books and prepare for this exam on Sermon 85, I actually want to leave you with a question that steps out of the textbook and right into your real life. Does your own spiritual engine have a strong enough Puritan chassis to effectively work out what God's Arminian grace is working in? Wesley's theology isn't just some dusty, static roadmap. It is a massive call to a living, breathing movement of continuous divine grace matched with faithful human obedience. Keep that both-and synergy front and center. Study hard, and you are absolutely going to crush this exam. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep pursuing that practical holiness.